Well, thank you ever so much, everybody, for joining another one of this innovation webinar series. This is our sixth of this year. We will take a break over the summer. We'll be back again in September. And I wanted just to put a quick word out to all those people that reach out and thank us for this content. We've got really nice feedback, and it's very much appreciated. If there are certain topics or ideas for future webinar series that you'd like to see, feel free to share those with us. There will be an opportunity for you to share some information, what you think about this content later on. So this topic is one of the more fun ones, actually. I think I've had the pleasure of preparing for. It's a topic that has been integrated into my daily work for more than 25 years, I think, which is winning over top management and how we can secure support for our innovation initiatives. And I'm going to take a little journey to a personal story to introduce this topic, which is when I was a corporate innovator. I had to do these big pictures, and I'm sure many of you who are in an innovation concept owner role will be familiar with this process, where you stand up in front of the great and the good of your organization, the people with the budget, the people with the decision making power, and you ask them for some money and some time and some capacity. So it's something that most of us are familiar with. And I think when I was doing this for the first time, it wasn't a process that I particularly enjoyed. It's fair to say I had to prepare a 40 slide deck to justify the level of investment that I needed for my innovation program. And the organization I was working for at the time did not have an especially high level of maturity when it comes to innovation management. It didn't have an especially high level of innovation climate, and frankly, I was learning on the fly as well. So I'm sure many of you will have been in those situations where you've struggled to get support, and it just feels like everything doesn't quite work as it should do, and it shouldn't be this hard. And in many ways, when I was starting to pull together the content for this session, I was kind of drawing back on those experiences of what worked, what didn't work, what was difficult, and then what has changed and what maybe is a little bit easier than it used to be. And I fear an awful lot of us are still stuck in those difficult challenges where it feels more of a process that isn't quite as it should be, and we're not necessarily making good decisions on the right things. So I'm going to talk about some of those pain points, and I'm going to talk about some of the things that I see work, but also I'm going to share quite a lot of things that don't work very well, and also some inspiration in terms of how we can make this situation better. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Colin Nelson. I'm Chief Innovation Consultant here at Hype. Basically means that I care about the people and process side of innovation. I was a former corporate entrepreneur and business development manager, so doing the day job of innovation for many years. But for the last 15 to 20 years or so, I've been working as a consultant and typically helping organizations of all kinds of different shapes and sizes and natures to improve innovation performance. And that's how I tend to think about my job: is how do I help my clients get better at innovation? I'm also a strong believer and proponent for the ISO 56000 set of standards for innovation management systems. I will touch on it very, very briefly today, but if you're interested, feel free to reach out to me. I'm now part of the BSI committee here in the UK on those standards. I do think a lot of what I'm going to share today has some resonance with the structures that we see within ISO, and where possible, I will try to draw those things out. For those of you who have joined us before, you will know that as part of these webinars, we offer a free consultation. You get picked randomly out of a hat. If you complete a little survey at the end of the session, there's a QR code there, which I'll also share at the end of the session. This will give you an opportunity to share a bit of feedback on the webinar, and also indicate if you would like to be considered for the free consultation, which is basically about 45 minutes of me and you chatting about anything you'd like in the space of innovation, and seeing if we can help you a little bit. So before I dig into the topic at hand today, I am going to just sort of set some context, and those of you who have been on these sessions before will have seen some of this context before, so apologies if it is similar to what you remember, but I think it's really important that we all start from the same position. And it's pretty obvious to me, and it continues to become more obvious, that as organizations, we are all trying to improve innovation performance, irrespective of what kind of company we are. I might be speaking to a hospital on one day and to a logistics company on another, and an aerospace company on the other. And in many ways, they're very, very different, but they're all being driven through similar needs to change how they operate. Sometimes it's due to pressure for growth and profitability, Sometimes it's down to business disruption. Sometimes it's down to some macro trends that are affecting the future of the organization. We need to try and protect it. Sometimes we're just trying to find better ways of working as innovators, dealing with the geographically spread expertise or trying to identify new thinking. None of us have enough resources. That's a given. We have to work with what we've got. And hopefully, if we do a good job, more resources will come to bear. But usually, we have to prove it out before we're going to secure greater revenue. So this is the sort of landscape within which we're operating. And of course, it won't be a surprise to any of you that we see corporate disruption is accelerating. And it's often seen innovation as a vehicle to help address that challenge of corporate disruption. In a previous session, I plotted out the major economic disruptions that have affected commercial companies over the last 15 years. And what was really interesting is you saw the number of disruptions accelerating over that time period. So if you go back to say credit crisis, and now we're in a situation where we have tariffs, we have wars, we have recently a pandemic. There are a great many things that affect organizations' commercial decisions that are external factors, and they're becoming more frequent. So regular change, regular disruption is just the new norm. And the way to, of course, mitigate that to a certain extent is to try and be a bit more agile, make money out of different things so that we can pivot and change as change happens. And that brings me on to the topic for today, which is how do we build more leadership support for our concepts around innovations? Now, in principle, that sounds like a simple question. But when you start scratching the surface of it, it's much more complex because there are certain things as innovators we can do, but as innovation leaders, there is a secondary set of things that we need to do to create an innovative climate, a climate which is allowing innovation to thrive. So I'm going to look at both parts of the puzzle. So if you're an innovation leader, this is for you. So I will share on the left-hand side. These are the climatic elements that we need to put in place, the infrastructure that we need to put in place to allow innovation to thrive. Now, if you're a concept owner, you're an innovator, I'm also going to share with you some insights that I think should help you. So things that you should strive for and giving an indication of what I think good process looks like. I also want to make it clear that there is some detail that is going to be missing in the content here. I can paint the big picture for you, but when it comes to your organization, best practices that are applicable for you and your situation, they vary, and different organizations of different types, different cultures, and different structures are going to need to apply some of these principles in different ways. So there is a deeper conversation to have, which is only possible with a much longer conversation. But today, what I'm going to do is hopefully give you all the moving parts that I see, and maybe I've missed some. I'm very interested to see if you think there are other things that we need to build into this content from your own experiences. As Rita said, if you have any questions as we go through, please do feel free to put them into the chat. If I can, I'll address them on the fly. If I can't, I'll address them at the end. And if I can't do that, I will make sure that you get an answer for you afterwards. Now, many of you, I can see from the names, attend these sessions relatively regularly. This one will be a little bit different. You'll be familiar that what I try to do is to share a lot of examples from where I think good practice is so that you can be inspired and you know that, okay, this is what I should be looking at in terms of illustrations of how I can apply, for example, best practice. In many cases, when I started to dig into this topic, I also saw a lot of things where I didn't see a lot of best practice. There are things where there's just stuff that's missing that we don't do well enough yet, or we're on a journey to get there, but we're not quite there, or we're at a level of detail that, frankly, organizations don't let me share, which, of course, you would expect. Not everything that I am exposed to, I can necessarily relay to the rest of you. So what I've tried to do instead, as of course I will throw some examples in place where I can, but is offer you some insights. It really is an aggregation of around 20 years of experience, and also be honest about the situation where this particular challenge, there is some way to go, and I don't think there's amazing examples where we can just say just copy what they do. There's always flaws and there's always gaps, and I think as long as we're on the journey to improve, that's fine. But this is one of the areas where I think there's still a lot we need to address. So a bit more context as to why this is an important topic. And I think we need to be open and honest about the fact that sometimes leaders miss when it comes to investing in the right stuff. And sometimes those misses can have been avoided, and sometimes they're just happenstance. So, some examples that you may be familiar with: Yahoo passed on buying Google twice in '98 and 2002. Microsoft, of course, missed that first wave of the smartphone revolution. And Nintendo, this was a new one to me, passed on the ability to invest in Sony PlayStation in the early 1990s. With hindsight, these look like really kind of bad decisions, but in reality, those organizations were using the best information they had available. And so what I'd like to try and imagine is, well, what could we do that could make that less likely, that we can miss less frequently? We're always going to miss from time to time. We're innovators. We're going to be pushing the boundaries, and not everything's going to be perfect. But there are things that we can do, I think, to make it a bit stronger, a bit more systematic. And it's also fair to say that as corporate innovators, just like I was all those years ago, can be quite frustrated. We can believe very strongly in our innovations and struggle to get the support from around us. We may feel that leaders aren't patient enough for something that may well take some time. Innovation takes time; it's not an overnight thing. We might think that leaders measure the wrong things. I've done a session previously on KPIs and metrics, and this was something that came up quite a bit. Simply measuring the wrong things. And the thing that really, really grates on people is that other less promising concepts seem to be prioritized ahead of ours. And of course, that is frustrating, and we can't always see the logic behind it. And if I had one, overriding insight, it's that short-termism is rife. Today is always chosen ahead of tomorrow. And again, some of that is due to our organizational factors. You might be working for a company that has needs to do quarterly record quarterly profits and revenues, and that can drive a short-termism. You might see certain family-owned businesses take a slightly longer view because they're not exposed to that level of regular reporting. So not all of this stuff is going to fix everything on this list, but I think if we can start on this path, we can address a good chunk of them. And where it leads us really is a management engagement problem, a problem that as innovators we struggle with because we find that, frankly, leaders are a bit skeptical about innovation. They want a lot more certainty than perhaps we can provide. And they want to know what they can trust and what is unclear, and have some pragmatism around that. And that's tough because when we're trying to pitch for budget and resources, it's very, very, very likely that we kind of offer anything in the most shiny, best possible view that we possibly can, because we want to secure our future. We want to secure that project that we believe in so strongly. But the reality is everything has some risk and everything has some flaws. And the reality is most of us won't work for organizations with good innovation infrastructure. So there are things that we can only influence to a certain extent. So that's the scene set. I want to just very briefly, and some of you will have seen this before, bring up our approach to innovation performance, which is our innovation building blocks model, which is closely aligned to the ISO standards 56000. I'm not going to dig into this in any great detail, but I want you to be aware that some of the themes that we see here are embedded quite significantly in some of the content we're going to talk about. Some of those themes are areas where our technology arms helps and supports, areas where there's more needs for scale. So, for example, employee engagement or foresight and listening, or maybe even providing a globally visible innovation pipeline. These are all things there where technology is helpful. But I'm going to be operating above that level today. We're going to be focused really on the people process elements, but just be aware that I might dip into some of these blocks as we go through, because quite a lot of them are impacted by this overall theme. So let's start off with this big topic of innovation climate. This is the environmental factors that we put into our organization that impact the business's ability to innovate successfully and consistently in a sustainable way. And that slide that you just saw a moment ago, that is a business model within which innovation can thrive. So in many ways, a lot of the climatic pieces, the things that leadership can control, are covered within ISO 56000. But there are certain slices of it which I think are more impactful, that have a bigger impact when we're trying to build those bridges between leadership and innovators. And these are the ones that we're going to go through today. And I've picked out 6 as illustrative examples of things that leaders can do to create an environment that is enabling innovation to thrive more regularly than we perhaps would have done otherwise. I'm going to go through each of these 6, just one slide per example, and I'm going to just give you a couple of examples here and there, but we'll talk about portfolio approach to innovation and protecting funding for innovation segments. We're going to talk about measures, which is something we've touched on before, but again, we need to touch on it again, I'm afraid. I'm going to talk about independent assessment of likelihood, which is something that again came up in the portfolio webinar that we did. How gate reviews work, and or how they don't work today, and then finally summarize with recognition of good process. Once I've been through these six, we'll then move on to the elements where innovators can influence. So we're going to do the leadership bit first, then we'll deal with the innovators secondary, but we'll cover all of this through today. So let's dig into this innovation climate and our first topic, which is a portfolio approach. Now, this is something I've talked about before, but it's really important to recognize that capacity and funding is finite. And unless we accept that as innovators and leaders, we are going to struggle to make consistently good decisions. We as an organizations need to make sure that within the boundaries that we have, how can we make sure that we're putting the right people on the right things with the right amount of backing to help us achieve our overall strategic goals? Now, the reality is in innovation, nothing is 100%. So that means we need to spread our risks and we need to probably do more than is actually ever going to be fulfilled. When I looked at implementation rates, and I've got a slide on this later, you'll be shocked in certain industries just how infrequently something new really comes to market. So within a situation where capacity and funding are finite, how do we make sure that we're working on the right stuff? And that comes down to firstly knowing what is in our portfolio. What is it that innovators are working on? Which sounds like a simple concept, but I still speak to a lot of companies where they say, we don't really know what the innovation projects are and what the change projects are. We don't have that single source of the truth, which makes it very difficult, therefore, to review that and see if there's something that we should be changing. What we also need to be aware of is once we have that portfolio view, is to review it in the light of what external and internal signals are telling us. So maybe we find that a concept isn't working so well. We may need to pivot, or we may find that the opportunity is different than we thought it was before. Or perhaps a new trend or a regulation emerges from outside the organization that we need to react to. So the portfolio should be a living, breathing thing, which is adjusted according to feedback and insights. And many organizations, they don't have a portfolio view, but it is one of the most basic things that we can do, which is not about putting controlling around what innovators are doing. It's about creating transparency of what they're doing. And once we have that portfolio, we can think about what is the right balance within that said portfolio to ensure that we have some protection of innovation funding across different segments. Now, many innovation programs, I'm sure many of you've witnessed this, are heavily focused on the incremental. And that short term thinking can shift resources to what I like to call the bottom left. So this picture here is something called an Ansoff matrix. You may have seen it before, and it's just a visualization of what is it we're working on. And the categorizations I quite like. So we have our incremental, which is where we're improving the things that we already do for the existing customers. And of course, we can move into more strategic spaces, more adjacent spaces. Perhaps we create a new offering for an existing customer or take an existing offering to a new market. And then, of course, we've got opportunities perhaps to leverage our core competencies and assets to break into more disruptive spaces. Some people will call this radical innovation. This is where we're creating something new for a customer that isn't currently a customer. Now, into short termism, what that tends to do is it tends to drive innovation into that green area. And it's green because it's the easiest of the three, right? We have more predictability. It's easier for us to know and talk to our clients and get some feedback on those things. And as we push out from those zones, it becomes more difficult. The challenge is that the pace of change now is so significant, especially technological change and regularity of disruption, that if we only ever do incremental innovation, we will struggle to protect the future of our organizations. And I think more and more leaders are coming to that understanding that they realize that balance needs to be shifted. And we're always going to want to care about keeping our existing customers happy and protecting that. But it's about having protection over some of those other zones. You might have a trend that disrupts your business where being incremental is simply not going to allow you to protect the future of your company. And I'm going to give you an example of this, which is Storda Enzo, a client I worked with some years ago. For those not familiar, uh, they are a paper and pulp company, or were a paper and pulp company based out of Scandinavia. And when they looked at the projections for usage of paper and pulp, they saw that they were going to drop down to about 40% of peak levels. Well, you can't incrementally innovate your way out of that situation. It's not necessarily a high margin business. So how do you break out of that world? You have to move into these more strategic adjacent spaces or even to disruptive spaces. And I put a copy of their website here in there because you can see how they're positioning themselves. So yes, packaging, wood products, and bio-based innovations. They pivoted to create a biomaterials business, and this is the business where all the growth and the profitability comes, and this is where the more radical use cases are coming. And of course, they've created a very lean business for the area which is in managed decline, where it's on core paper and pulp products. But this is an organization that had to pivot to survive, or certainly to maintain its market position and thrive in a different direction. So if I just click back, they couldn't incrementally innovate their way through that journey. They had to break out into these more strategic spaces. And the point about protecting funding for innovation segments is accepting the fact we don't know what the future holds. We know we need some balance in this portfolio, and that balance is likely to have to shift depending on what factors are out there. And so we need to review it. We need to protect the funding. So at least we're doing a little bit of disruptive stuff, and we're doing a little bit of strategic stuff so that we don't get into that trap of being stuck in the incremental innovation space forever. So moving on to minimum viable measures. It's really important that all concept owners share similar data. If we don't look at innovation the same way, concept A to concept B, it's very difficult to work out what should go into our portfolio, as we end up comparing apples with oranges, to use an analogy. And so the trend here is to start to consider what I call minimum viable metrics. So these are things like investment in, return out, timeline, and whether we're doing a small innovation that's incremental or a big radical thing, we always have that data shared centrally so that leadership can look at the portfolio and say, well, okay, we can see we can put more energy over here and that's going to create this result, or we can put more energy over here and that's going to create that result. And in an environment where resources and budgets are finite, that's a helpful thing to be able to do. And even if these numbers are rough judgments, and often they will be because, hey, we're in innovation, because if everyone's doing rough judgments, that's better than nothing. So increasingly common that organizations are thinking, let's ensure that we have that minimum viable data available from every concept that we're working on in one central place. We can really look at that portfolio holistically. Moving on to independent assessment of likelihood. Now, this is one of those areas where I really don't see enough organizations doing this. And I'm going to use my own example again from earlier, which is when I was creating forecasts for the impact for the innovations I was working on, it was my forecast, it was my judgment, which of course could then be pulled apart and questioned and looked at in different ways by the gate review committees. But the reality is, if we take a portfolio approach, everything's a judgment call, and it's just a question of likelihood. So, where I think we might end up as an innovation community is to appoint essentially an independent committee of people who can assess the likelihood of concepts that's separate from the people that are creating the business cases around it. So yes, of course you're going to create the business case. You know what the metrics are, but the likelihood should be independently assessed, and that should be used as a vehicle to look at the balance in that portfolio. We want concept owners to be biased, to be passionate about their concepts, but we're also biased, right? We want to make sure it succeeds. Well, that makes leaders' jobs difficult. And I made the point earlier about developing trust. And it's very difficult to develop trust when all it is someone's opinion. But if we had a committee of people who are independently assessing the likelihood of a concept, it makes it much easier to trust whether we should be doing A, B, and C, or D, E, and F. So this is a very simple thing as an innovation leader that we can do, which actually helps create an awful lot more trust in the decisions that we make when it comes to investment. The next point I want to make is around changing the dynamics of gate reviews. Many of you complained about this to me, and certainly my experience as well, is when we sit in a gate review and we're asking for more money or more time or more resources, this can be quite antagonistic. They can be quite challenging meetings to be in, where you're up against a wall and everyone's firing questions at you about to justify your existence. And I think there's a place for that. You've got to be able to stand by your concept, of course, but I also think there's a place to say, can we help you? Can we help make this stronger? If we accept that we've got good people who are working on good things, our job as a gate review committee, of course, should be decide whether this should proceed or not. But it should also be our job to say, actually, I think we could go in a different direction here. Maybe we should iterate this. Or maybe we need to go back and work on that area. Can we help you make this stronger? Or can we help you get to a decision quicker than we currently see? Um, And I think that's a topic that I'm going to talk about more on the corporate innovators area. But I think this idea of saying, yes, there will be a decision, but can we help you? What can we do within the realms of what's possible within our organization and our available partners to make what you're working on stronger, or to make it easier for us to come to a collective decision about whether we should proceed or not? And it's a tonal thing, but I think it's an important one. If we've got good people working on good things, our answer shouldn't be, let's beat them up in a meeting. It should be, how do we help you make this better or stop quicker? So, a couple of final points in this climate piece is recognizing good process. This is, again, an area where I feel we're just not that great at, but we need to get better. If you think about failure rates, and you'll have your own, you might think that maybe, well, when we implement things, it's maybe 1 in 10 or 1 in 5 of the things that we set out to do. Either way, an awful lot of stuff fails. And it should be the concept owner's job to follow a good process, but we can't expect everything to succeed. But when we look at how we measure corporate innovators, what we find is it's really on outcomes. You only get the praise and the recognition and maybe the prize if you actually implement. But when so much of the work is, by definition, not going to come to fruition, that's only part of the puzzle. I think we should also be prepared to recognize good process. We should be recognizing people who are prepared to take a risk. We should be recognizing people that have done the right things to bring something to a conclusion and said, you know what, I don't think this is the best choice for the company at this point. I pull out this example from Tata. They have a Dare to Try award, which I love. It's about saying, you're prepared to have a go, whether you're successful or not. It's recognizing good process, and I think that's really nice. So these are 6 climatic factors. These are all things that we can do within the realms of innovation leadership, but that's only part of the puzzle. We can create a fantastic environment for our corporate innovators, but if they don't do good things, then we're going to struggle as well. These two topics really go hand in hand. So let's move on to effective concept development. These are the things that are in the realms of what a corporate innovator can do. And you may see some gray areas between what's leadership and corporate innovator, but hopefully you get the idea. I'm going to take you through, and again, six themes. There may well be some others. Again, feel free to throw them into the chat if you see something that you think is missing from here. I think there is quite a lot that you could add to this particular list. But yeah, it's interesting to starting point. If I can just ask everybody to be on mute, that would be amazing. I think we had somebody who wasn't. So let's take you through the list. So we want to talk about engaging innovators on hunting grounds. That's the early stage of the process, basically getting alignment on the new stuff. We want to align insights with concepts to enrich them. We want to create forecasts that match how leadership make decisions. Leaders are really predictable. They care about impact, they care about money, and they care about time. So let's think about how we create a forecast that matches how they measure things. And if everybody does the same thing and we look at things as a portfolio, it makes everyone's life an awful lot easier. I'm not going to dig too deeply into a good concept development process. There are many out there, whether it's stage gates or lean business canvas or whatever it is. But follow a process is what I would say. Follow a process that's appropriate for what you're doing, even if it's not perfect. It's better not having one, and it will create more trust with leadership. I'm going to emphasize about accepting a wider community of support. And I'll touch on that in a moment, a second. And I'm also going to, I think it's only fair to say sometimes it's responsibility for the concept owner to say, I don't think this is the best path for us. We need to stop development. And they should not be punished for that, right? Just because they believe that they don't think this can succeed, it shouldn't be their job to bash their head against the wall. So let's dig into these 6 topics in a bit more detail. So hunting ground engagement. And you may say, well, why are we talking about this? As concept owners, we are trying to justify investment and time on the things that we're already working on. Yes, but sometimes we start in the wrong place. If we don't have alignment between the hunting grounds that the organization is prepared to engage with and where we're innovating, it's going to make your life as an innovator much more difficult when it comes to engaging with leadership about investing and putting time and money into the thing that you're working on. If you've been through a conversation with leaders where we've looked at, say, 20 different areas for exploration, and we sit down with them, we say, we think these are the best 5. What do you think? Do you agree? Are these the zones that you're prepared to commit to? And then when you develop innovations aligned to that zone, they're already kind of partway there. If there's no connection between what they believe we should be doing and what we're doing, of course it is going to become problematic. I remember an organization in the telecommunications sector where they had a fantastic set of R&D people who really had chance to experiment and play around and try out new things, but they didn't proactively engage leadership about where the innovation and opportunities were. Essentially, people playing around. And then when leadership really started to struggle, they had to go back to them and said, no, no, these are the 5 zones that we're prepared to invest in. These are the zones where we care. Go innovate there. And if that meant that some people unfortunately lost their jobs because they just weren't aligned with where leadership were prepared to invest. And if, of course, we might say, well, yeah, leadership should be caring about this topic and they don't. Well, let's go and have that conversation. But the starting point has to be, let's engage leaders and ensure that we have alignment between what we're trying to do and where they're prepared to commit to. A little example here is AkzoNobel. This is something they put out publicly, but they're stating the zones of innovation that they are interested in internally and publicly. So this is something you can get on their website. They say, well, we're interested in productivity, we're interested in asset protection, we're interested in service enhancement, and there's more detail in each of these. They're interested in environmental protection and carbon reduction. This is something that's public. They've told you where their innovation focuses, and if you're not familiar with AkzoNobel, it's a paints and coatings company. So that might make some more sense for you. But we know that leadership care about these zones, and that means that it's much, much more straightforward to align our corporate innovators to those zones, and of course, any third parties that want to innovate with us with those zones. Just as an illustration. Compelling insights. I love this topic. It's really about enriching our concepts with all of the different data that's relevant. It's about complementing the concept with a range of things that make it stronger, harder to copy, and more compelling when it comes to putting it in front of a leader. A concept is a concept, and that's fine. But if we can add to that concept, well, there are some trends that this is addressing. There's an emerging technology that we can take advantage of that our competitors don't seem to be. We can build upon some existing competency. We don't necessarily need to build everything again from scratch. Well, it also aligns to some customer feedback that we've seen. That's so much more impactful as a pitch than just, hey, here's a thing and here's the business case for that thing. So if we can enrich it with those range of insights, that's phenomenal. And I wanted to use as an illustrative example Maxion Wheels and Michelin, where they created a wheel with a flexible rim. But the concept came out of looking at insights and then working out where to go and hunt based upon those insights. So the insights that complemented this wheel with a flexible rim, where Michelin and Maxwell Wheels worked together, were a couple of trends. So they saw that generally speaking, we have poorer road conditions in the West than we used to. We also see that consumers like larger wheels than they used to. Emerging technology, so we see more flexible wheels being created by certain specialists. They could see that they could build upon an existing competency. If we were still in the wheel manufacturing business, and one of the other thing that they saw is that they would get consumer feedback on more blowouts than they used to be, because that combination of poor road conditions and larger wheels was a bad combination. And so they innovated around this topic. And you can imagine that this is so much more compelling. You could go to the board and say, we want to create a wheel with a flexible rim, and we don't have all the skills, so we're going to partner with Michelin. That's a very different conversation than saying, this is the problem that we're seeing out there in the market. These are the set of insights that we've seen, and this is why we think we should go and do it. Much more compelling. Something very practically we can do as innovators to enrich our innovations. Forecasts. I kind of touched on this already, so I'll skip through this relatively quickly, but it's about accepting the fact that leaders make decisions in the way they make decisions. And they are predictable. It's money in, money out, timeline, risks, opportunity cost. And if you're not sure what opportunity cost means, it basically means we're choosing to do this as opposed to that. In the realm of innovation portfolio management, that is absolutely what we're doing. We're choosing to A over B. If that's how they measure things, we need to create forecasts that align to that thinking, because they're not going to change. When they went on their MBA classes, as leaders, they learn a particular way of looking at forecasting and looking at investment profiles. And so we need to align that. So although we're going to dream all the cool stuff, that's fantastic. We still need to create forecasts that align to how they make decisions. And ideally what we want is consistency of those forecasts across multiple concept owners. So, I know as innovators, we don't like a lot of process and a lot of constraints, but it makes everyone's lives easier if we're all following some of the similar rules. I mentioned earlier, follow a process, whatever that process is. If it's a business model, it's going to be one thing. If it's a new product, it may be another thing, but follow a well-worn process. There's plenty out there. Make sure, of course, it's appropriate to the type of innovation you're working on. But if we have a process and that's consistently used across multiple innovators, again, it helps build trust with leadership about what are we working on, why are we working on it, and what decisions are we making, as opposed to looking at other options in the portfolio. We have some transparency of where each of the innovations are in that journey. Again, if you're not sure what to look at, this is another big topic. We can have a conversation on another day, but follow a good process. A couple of final points. Accept the benefits of collective intelligence. When I talk to corporate innovators about problems that they have, where they've hit a roadblock, they can't make a piece of technology work, or they can't make the chemistry work or the science work, I ask them what do they do, and they typically will ask the few trusted people around them to see if it can be solved. Some of them will confess, they bash their heads against a wall for a while, but what's interesting is if we can expose that problem to a wider community of people and we can take advantage of collective intelligence that exists within the organization or even beyond the organization, we tend to find that sometimes solutions emerge. And even when they don't emerge, that tells us something as well. Now, collective intelligence as a utility is something that many organizations have adopted now. We have the ability to reach out to large or diverse groups of people and see if there are solutions to our problems. I was talking to a chemical company recently who said that they had this really tough problem. They've been wrestling with it for about 18 months. And they threw it out to a couple of academic partners who solved it in 20 minutes. We have to be a bit braver sometimes, and we have to be prepared to ask. And I want to connect this part to the leadership part of gate reviews. If you can imagine going to a gate review and saying, "Well, we really like the concept. It's fantastic. Everything stacks up. But we've got this one core problem." The leadership could say, "Okay, we'll go back and work on it, and then come back when you're ready." Or what they could say is, "Can we help you?" Or as a lead, or as a concept owner, we could say, "Can I have your help? Could I have access to the collective intelligence of my own organization or our key partners to see if we can accelerate that?" I think that's a much more mature and effective conversation. So be brave and ask if others can help. If you're solving problems or validating something to try and make it stronger than it was, or optimizing things that are new, take advantage of all the best minds that are available to you. You might be, have several PhDs and be a world's expert in one particular thing. But when we're innovating, we're pushing the boundaries. We're breaking new ground. And of course, it's not reasonable for us to expect every innovator to know everything. And final point is remember that failure is a part of innovation. Some example failure rates here, and it may be slightly different in your company. These are just things that I pulled off online. So pharmaceuticals, 6 in 7 things that we try fail. Energy, 3 in 4 innovations fail. Consumer goods, 4 in 5 fail. You can see there's an awful lot more failure than there is success. And that's normal. That's innovation. But if that's the case, yes, as leaders, we need to be recognizing good process to make sure that we're stopping things when we should stop them. But there is also a burden on us as innovators to say, I'm going to develop a concept to a viable point. Sure, I'm going to follow a good process. But if I find that I cannot make this viable, I can't make it work, and I've exhausted all my opportunities here, I need to be prepared to say, I think this is something we shouldn't pursue anymore. And I think they should be saluted when they do so. It's not a failure to say, I don't think this is going to work when so many innovations fail. Yes, we have to do it in the right way. Yes, we have to show that we've exhausted all opportunities. But majority of work that we do in innovation does fail. And what we want to do is make sure we fail quickly. You've heard this before: fail forwards, fail quickly, fail fast. Well, that's also on the innovators to put their hands up and say, I think maybe there's a better use of my time and energies, and can I be allocated onto something different? And I think we have to be a bit braver about that. So, quick review of everything we talked about. Covered a lot of ground here, and I know that there are extra things that I couldn't squeeze in, but I think this gives us a good oversight. In terms of the leadership environments, that things that we can include, having a portfolio approach, protecting funding for different innovation segments, so we don't have that short-termism issue all of the time. That comes with that requirement of accepting the fact that we do have to do something outside of the incremental. Focus on measuring the right things and do so consistently across all of the concept owners. trying to create an environment where we can independently assess likelihood. Some organizations are forming innovation committees or innovation governance boards. They're the perfect home for a group of people who can aggregate a set of estimates in terms of what likelihood a particular innovation has. You saw in that previous slide just how often things fail. So we know that nothing's 100%, but equally nothing's probably 0% either. And we need to make sure we've got that right balance in our portfolio. Try to offer help at gate reviews. Think about, yes, we do need to take our responsibility for what gets money and energy seriously, but if we can help take a problem away, if we can help validate something, if we can help enrich something beyond what it was previously imagined to be, we should do that. That's in everyone's interest. And then the final point here is a recognizing good process, not just the outcomes. Outcomes, of course, are always going to attract recognition, but bear in mind a lot of innovations fail. We want people to be following good process. And then these are the things that we can do as innovators. We can build support through engaging leaders on hunting grounds. We can align our insights to concepts. You heard that example from Michelin and Maxi on Wheels. We can create forecasts in a way that align to how leadership make decisions. We can follow a concept development process that others are following, where we have some consistency there. We can embrace the fact that we might not have all the answers as individuals and try to tap into that wider collective intelligence that's available to us. And if we do that, the upside is we enrich, make something better. But also the upside is if we can't solve something by the collective expertise of everybody that's available to us, and of course that gives us a reason to stop, and that means there's a reason to put our energies into something else that may be more productive. Do stop development if necessary. That's not something that we should be shy about if we think there's better use of our time and energy. Amazing. So I think we have a little time for questions. I'm going to skip over this summary slide because I've just done a summary anyway. As I mentioned earlier before, if you fill in this little survey, there will be an opportunity to be put into a hat for a free consultation. Just follow that QR code. It doesn't have to be just this topic. It can be anything in the realms of innovation you want to discuss. Very happy to do that. It will be slightly delayed. I am taking a short break over the summer, but come September, I'll be available again. We'll also be doing more of these webinars. But yes, we will be happy to honor that offer a free consultation if you wish. Any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat. It's been quiet today, despite we've had quite a lot of people joining us. Very happy to take any questions. We have a little bit of time. This is a quiet group. So if those of you haven't seen, yes, those slides will be shared afterwards, and at a future date, this presentation will also be made available on YouTube for those of you who want to watch it there. If you're shy about putting a question forward now, feel free to contact me afterwards, connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to dig into whatever it is you're interested in the future. All right. Give it a couple more minutes in case anyone's still busy typing. If anyone's prepared to share anything that they think should go onto this list, feel free. So just to take a slight step back, I talked about two big themes: things that leadership can do and things that innovators can do. This is not an exhaustive list. This is my kind of top 12, I suppose. If there's anything that you think should be in the top 10 to 12 that isn't on this list, I'd be very interested to hear if anyone wants to share them. Thank you for the feedback, Dennis. Most appreciated. All right. Well,
Colin,
I think, yeah, go ahead, Dennis.
I probably one thing, you have the portfolio approach there, but I think before the portfolio approach comes for leadership, probably the alignment with company strategy. So for me, this is a sequence, yeah. So company
Yeah.
strategy, innovation strategy, portfolio approach. So these three
Yeah.
in a line. So portfolio approach is probably the third one in that mix.
It's a great point. One of the things that's interesting, I think, with organizations, I would say medium to low innovation maturity, is many of them actually don't have a portfolio at all. They don't have a transparency of what they're working on. I think that transparency is necessary before we can then start to think about strategy. But you're absolutely right. Those three need to be in a line, because they're not independent of each other. We need to know what we're working on to be able to tell if we need to be able to shift. We need to know whether what we're working on, how that presents itself as a portfolio, to then compare that to our corporate goals in terms of growth, what kind of revenues and profits we need to be generating over what period of time, to then validate whether this is the right mix or not. So there's the corporate strategy, and then there's the innovation strategy that flows from there. But I think you're absolutely correct that there needs to be full alignment on those things, because without it, we could be going off in entirely the wrong direction. Yeah, so it's a great point.
Yeah, so I'm just doing that with the customer. So we are putting all their current products and projects on, we are not putting it on an unsolved, we are using Stacy, but it's more or less the
Hmm.
same stuff.
Yep.
And then they have a goal, a strategy goal that says doubling revenue by 2030.
Hmm.
And I said, so then let's see with what you said, kind of having at least some measures. And so we said, okay, then all your new projects, how much revenue will they drive in 3 years and 5 years?
Hmm.
So if we're, and then we can see how big the gap is actually. Yeah,
Yeah, that's
with
our innovation growth
even
gap.
with
Yep.
only assumptions, yeah, and then we can see
Yeah.
if your revenue goal is even at all realistic, or if we need to push a little bit harder
Yeah.
on some stuff here.
Completely agree. And of course, if we see that the revenue goal is completely misaligned with what our goals are, what's possible for the innovation portfolio, leadership then have a decision to make. Do we go a bit more adventurous, which may come with a little bit more
Hmm.
risk, or do we need to shift our strategy? But without that data, without information, it's really difficult. So, if anybody that's sort of in that medium to low levels of innovation maturity, objective one, get some transparency of what you're actually working
Yeah,
on currently,
yeah.
get some numbers by, even if it's just judgments, and then plot it on an Ansoff matrix or something, so you can actually see what likely financial impact we're going to have. Even if it's judgments, it's better than nothing. And then we can have a proper conversation about whether our strategy is right or not, whether we need to
Hmm.
shift it. Yeah, great points, Dennis. Thank you for sharing them. All right. Any final questions? Well, it looks like we're done for the day. So thank you ever so much again for joining us. If this is your first one of these webinars, please go back. There's been some really nice conversations that we've had over the last 6 months, all kinds of different topics, all kinds of different slices of the innovation management world. We do get wonderful feedback on them, and we appreciate any insights that you have. As I said earlier, if there are topics you would like to see us dig into, I think the last one we did one was around AI and what role that's going to play for innovation management. Please feel free to send them into part of the feedback form. Again, if you have the QR code, which I will bring back up, there we go. There'll be an opportunity to fill that in. As we mentioned earlier, you will get a copy of the slides and a link to the webinar for the future as well, if you wish to watch it. So thank you ever so much, everybody, for joining. Always great to have these conversations. And as I mentioned, I will be back in September with the next one.